Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dr. Richard Allinger of the Newburgh Theological Seminary, Department of Theology, Division of Church History. And I wanted to actually go into the content of my church history teachings, but because of the unfolding of the Flint water crisis right now, I wanted to just say, as I bring these into view, these are the two. Now, I know that many of you are used to seeing in the Flint community bottles of plastic bottles, 16.9, like this right here, 16.9 fluid ounces of plastic bottled water. But since I last saw you in my last show, Governor Snyder has caused the free distribution of plastic bottled water, purified plastic bottled water, no longer to be freely distributed in Flint, which they've been doing now for, well, after the congressional investigation on the Flint water crisis and the Environmental Protection Agency investigation down in Washington for the last 2 years, since 2016, 2017, and up to April of 2018, Governor Snyder said that the free distribution of this purified bottled water in plastic bottles has costed about $2 million a day. And as you know, the pods were only open 6 days a week, Monday through Saturday. They're closed on the Lord's Day. And they're only open, the pods, the Governor Snyder closed here this last week from noon to 6 p.m. So I figured it out that at $2 million a day, it cost $1.3 to $1.4 billion for the last 2 years of the free distribution of these 16-ounce plastic purified bottled waters to be distributed. Now, Governor Snyder said he's going to take that money now and use it to make public schools more secure and safe with the money, that he wants to kind of channel the money now that would be saved from distributing the water to making our public schools more safe and secure. However, there's been a debate on the part of the community, local government officials and church officials, has to, with all of the new copper pipe installations that have been started by our Honorable Mayor Dr. Karen Weaver, working with the state and local governments, state and local and federal funding, have installed about 6,000 residences now with the new pipes. And probably, depending on the weather, it'll probably take up till 2020 for the rest of all of the new pipes to be installed. And some in the community think that the free distribution of water at these pods that had been closed this last couple of weeks here in April of 2018 should have remained open until 2020. But in the meantime, what has happened is the First Trinity Missionary Baptist Church, under the auspices of the late Dr. Fred Haukenhall and his lovely First Lady, Dr. Marion Haukenhall, and the new pastor to replace Dr. Fred Haukenhall at the First Trinity Missionary Baptist Church on B Street here in Flint, upon Dr. Haukenhall's homegoing, was Pastor Ezra Tillman. And I had, in a recent conversation here recently, Dr. Haukenhall's widow, Dr. Marion Haukenhall, had told me to get with Pastor Ezra Tillman at First Trinity to find out more about what they're doing now to assist the community until perhaps maybe different hearings in the courts could bring about the reestablishment or the reopening of the water pods in Flint and restart the distribution of free water in plastic bottles again. But until then, Pastor Tillman is from Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday of the week from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. on those days, have brought 22 truckloads from New York State of this aqua, called aqua, purified bottled water. And it's not in plastic bottles, but it's in sterilized containers like this that we're not used to seeing. But this is now made available to families that will be there at at those appointed hours of distribution at First Trinity. And also, just Saturday, just a one-day event, the Teamsters had a truckloads of these purified plastic bottled water, 16.9 fluid ounces, brought to their parking lot across from the Amtrak station on South Dorn Highway. The Teamsters, and they had people, they were flagging people down with those neon yellow vests on the highway, telling them that they could be directed into the Teamsters parking lot to be given cases of this, again, plastic bottled water. And so, and I believe that there's other churches in the community. I think the Asbury Methodist Church on Davison Road, across the street from the old Brown Funeral Home, is still assisting people with water. And also the Westcourt Street Church of God is also involved in a similar distribution of water like First Trinity Missionary Baptist Church is doing. So I just want to thank all of these different church leaders and people for praying with regard to the water crisis that we're now in. And we hope by 2020 that the Honorable Mayor, Dr. Karen Weaver, with the state and federal funding, will be able to get the rest of the residences done in Flint by 2020 as the weather permits. Some weather, they can't really work in putting the new water pipes in. Now, with regard to church history and the program that I teach here on Channel 17 Fact, Flint Area Community Television, and also this program is aired on Friday afternoon, not just on Channel 17 Fact, but also on WFOV 92.1 on the FM dial on the radio. I've been talking about church history and my lessons in church history, and all of the different programs that have been presented here on television and radio over the last 2 or 3 years have been encrypted on the internet, and they can simply be accessed by going to the YouTube homepage and just put in the search box Richard Allinger Presents, and you'll see all of the programs again and the instruction that I have shared with you. And by way of review, before I get back to the last couple programs I was sharing with you here lately, my first published book called The Reformation Cannot Be Over, which was first of all translated into Urdu, and 6,000 copies were distributed starting last October 2017, and small pockets of Christians in Pakistan, which is 98% Muslim, to celebrate the 500th anniversary of the Protestant Reformation, which was launched by the Dr. Martin Luther, posting his 95 Theses against the Roman Catholic Church, October 31st, 1517. And the English version of this book will be is being worked on, is in the hand of the publishers right now, and will be encrypted on the internet and Amazon for people to actually access in English. But for right now, only the Urdu speaking, and in Pakistan there's Arabic. There's people that speak Arabic because of the Muslim religion, and the Hindus, Hindustani and Urdu, that have seen this book, and it's had quite an impact over there. They said this book of mine is the first book that was ever published on the Reformation in Pakistan. And you know that Pakistan is only a 70-year-old nation. It's about the age of the state of Israel. Israel's having their 70th birthday this year too. And before I get into the chapter I presented to you, the introduction and chapter 1 of that book in previous broadcasts, but before I pick up with chapter 2 in that particular book, The Reformation Cannot Be Over, I wanted to, by way of review, in the way of church history in the last couple years of the instruction, if you could like bring it all together shortly and succinctly to as to what I had been teaching, is that the English word church derives from the late Greek word, and I'm going to hold this flashcard up if you can see it. The English word church derives from the late Greek word kyriakon, and this is what the Greek word looks like. Kyriakon. Do you see it? Kyriakon. The Greek word kyriakon, which means in English the Lord's house. And in the New Testament, I'm going to hold up this other one. In the New Testament, the word translates to the Greek word ekklesia. This is what the word ekklesia looks like, and I'll spell it out as you look at the flashcard. Ekklesia. All right, now the origin of the church, according to Matthew, the only gospel, there's in the New Testament you've got Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and as to the origin of the church, according to Matthew, the only gospel of the four to use the word church. The origin of the church goes back to Jesus himself in Matthew chapter 16, verses 15 through 18. And I will take this Schofield Reference Bible here, and this is the Schofield Reference Bible study system. And when I turn to Matthew chapter 16 and read verses 15, 16, 17, and 18, this is what it says. He saith unto them, but whom say ye that I am? And Simon Peter answered and said, Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus answered and said unto him, Blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood hath not revealed it unto thee, but my Father which is in heaven. And I say also unto thee, that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. Now, this is the word of the Lord out of the Schofield study system. And I'll put that back down here. And now, the nature of the church age, since Christ established the New Covenant, New Testament church in the shedding of his blood on Golgotha's cross, the nature of the church age throughout most of the history, the nature of the church has been defined by divided Christians trying to establish the validity of their own existence. And as an example, shortly in the 2nd century, the Donatists of North Africa in the early centuries focused on the purity of the church and claimed to be the only church that measured up to biblical standard. Another example in the Middle Ages was various sects defined the church in such ways as to claim that they and not the Roman Catholic Church were the true church. And for example, you have the Arnoldists. They emphasize poverty and identification with the masses. And a lot of the presentation on television of what we call the social gospel comes from this this example here of the Arnoldists, who emphasize poverty and identification with the masses. And then you have the Waldenses, and they stressed literal obedience to Jesus' teaching and emphasized evangelical preaching, which would be like on television today, a lot of the evangelical messages that come from different evangelists and pastor teachers come from this idea that the literal obedience to Jesus' teaching should be emphasized. Then you had, for example, the Roman Catholics, and they claimed to be the only true church, and that was over against that the Pope was supreme as a successor to Apostle Peter. This is what the Roman Catholics claimed. And when Jesus established the church in the last 3.5 years of his life here on earth, he taught the apostles how he wanted the church to operate after he was gone back to his Father, which is in heaven. And also, in addition to those 12 that were with Christ when he was here, there was a post-resurrection appearance of Christ when he appeared and spoke to Saul of Tarsus on the road to Damascus, Syria, in the 1st century, blinding him for a while, then led him to the backside of the Arabian desert and revealed further instructions with regard to the pattern of his church, which makes up half of the New Testament books. And then in the 1st century, there was in church history the apostles, and then in the 2nd century the apologetics, after all the apostles martyred or died, like John the Elder on close to Ephesus, where after receiving the book of Revelation, John wasn't martyred, but he lived almost to be 100 years old, and God revealed to him the revelation, and he died a natural death. But most of the others were martyred on Gentile soil. And then after the apostles all were martyred or died, then came in the 2nd century early on the apologetics. And the apologetics defended the church against the slandering lies of the Christians that led to their persecution and martyrdom. You see, early on in the 2nd century, after the apostles died out, Satan possessed a lot of people in religions and false teachings to make slandering lies against the Christians. And the apologetics was a group of by their group of writers that had to actually defend the Christians against some of the slandering lies that have been brought against the early Christians. that led really to these slandering lies, led to their persecution and martyrdom. And then at the end of the 2nd century and around into the 3rd century was the polemist, and that group of people that wrote brought about an understanding, the polemists, they brought about an understanding that led to the Roman Empire's gradual acceptance of Christianity. In the beginning centuries in the Roman Empire, Christianity, the Roman Empire tried to stamp out. But as the polemists began to write, and after the writings of the apologetics, the Roman Empire began to accept Christianity and look at it in a good light instead of believing the slandering lies. And that led to a lot of the persecution and the martyrdom of many of the Christians. And by the 3rd century, the Roman Emperor Constantine made an edict that actually made Christianity, through the work of the apologetics and the polemists over the period of time, to be declared the and mandated the official religion of the Roman Empire. And that's when persecution kind of went down, began to slow down under Nero and Domitian, and it became the official and accepted religion of the Roman Empire. Also, the polemists in their writings laid the groundwork for what would happen in the 3rd and 4th century, the first 500 years of what we call the early church, or the ancient church, would be the first alliance of the church and state coming together. And then the next group was the church fathers. The church fathers in the first 500 years of the early or ancient church contributed by their writings to an understanding of what Christ's doctrines were and the other theological concerns with regard to the deity and the humanity of God himself, Christ, and what the Holy Trinity was, because there were some questions about that, and other soteriological and Christological and doxological and metamorphical theological issues that the church fathers brought a lot of elucidation to by their writings. Some of the church fathers, I'm sure that you may well have heard. One really was the greatest of all of them in the first 500 years of the church, St. Augustine of Hippo. That was in North Africa, and he was the greatest of all the church fathers, St. Augustine of Hippo. And then there was Clement of Rome and Athanasius and Ignatius of Antioch. There was Polycarp, Orion, Ambrose, Chrysostom, or his other name, he was always known as John of Constantinople. Chrysostom was known as John of Constantinople. And then Cyprian, and then there was Gregory the Great and Tertullian, who had written in his work that the blood of the martyrs was the seed of the church. And then leaving that early years of the church, the first 500 years, and looking at the 16th century, the magisterial Reformation fathers, there was Martin Luther, founder of the Lutheran Church, and then John Calvin, the founder of the Church of England and the Presbyterian Church, and John Zwingli, founder of the Anabaptist. And but of all the different church fathers and theologians through all those years, it was really, again, St. Augustine of Hippo was church history's greatest theologian. History claimed that he is the greatest of all the church fathers. He was born in Tayasti, North Africa, which we know as Algeria today, and he is the father of Orthodox theology. And a lot of the 16th century magisterial Reformation fathers got their theology from this great church father, Augustine of Hippo. And he designed the church clothes, or the habitat, for the Catholic priests and the nuns, of which they're still wearing today. And you're not to confuse St. Augustine of Hippo with the Augustine of Canterbury. The first Archbishop of Canterbury is a different St. Augustine. Don't mix the two Augustines. They're not the same personage. And now with this quick review of what I had been talking about, you can go back in more detail going to YouTube and just put Richard Allinger Presents in the search box. Can have all these previous programs that I talked with you about all these in quite detail for anyone that's interested. In the last 2 minutes of the broadcast here, I would like to begin to open up chapter 2 of my first published book, The Reformation Cannot Be Over. It will soon be available for people to access on Amazon.com, but right now it's in the hands of the publishers for the English version. But I'm just now, in the last minute of this broadcast, going to read to you the title of chapter 2, and that is The Doctrine of Justification by Faith Alone is the article upon which the church stands or falls. In Latin, articulus status et cadentis ecclesiae. It means by justification by faith alone is the article upon which the church stands or falls. And with that comes the 5 solos of the 16th century Protestant Reformation: sola scriptura, sola fide, sola gratia, sola Christia, and solo Deo Gloria. Well, this is Richard Allinger saying goodbye, friends, and I hope you can join me in the next segment of my Lessons in Church History so I can pick up with this chapter 2 of my book, The Reformation Cannot Be Over.
Psychologist, and helping people was my thing. After my stroke, when Meals on Wheels started, I was on the other end of the stick, so to speak, and I appreciated it very much, the attention that was given. My name is Julius Gaines, creative writer, poet, photographer. America, let's do lunch.
Drop off a hot meal and say hello. Volunteer by donating your lunch break at americaletsdolunch.org.
Everybody has a dream. Mine was to see the ocean. And with a little help, I made it.
Don't worry, the 74 people were picked before me in the NFL draft. To fight childhood obesity, United Way and the NFL are helping kids play more. To donate or volunteer, go to unitedway.org/play60.
Now I get it.
1 in 6 seniors faces the threat of hunger, and millions more live in isolation.
America, let's do lunch.
Drop off a hot meal and say a quick hello. Volunteer for Meals on Wheels by donating your lunch break at americaletsdolunch.org.
People think I'm trash, but they're wrong. Today, I'm just an aluminum can, but one day, I could be a stadium.
Me dijeron que no debía soñar. Me llamaron pedazo de basura y juraron que eso es todo lo que llegaría a ser. Dijeron que una botella no podría ver el océano. Ríndete. Regresa al basurero. Pero no les hice caso. Le abrí paso. Y ahora estoy aquí. Soy lo que siempre quise ser.
Is the most prominent thing, and I am at peace with myself. I didn't deal this deck, I'm just playing the game. That's all. That's it. Meals on Wheels has given me a mode of freedom that I wouldn't have otherwise. Been making sure they get the nutrition that I need, and it's a balanced meal. My name is Maurice McGriff. America, let's do lunch.
Drop off a hot meal and say hello. Volunteer by donating your lunch break at americaletsdolunch.org.
Back, ladies and gentlemen. I'm so glad you could join me. I'm your host, Richard Allinger, presenting lessons in church history. And what I would like to do is share with you the second chapter of my first published book, which was called The Reformation Cannot Be Over. And chapter 2 was titled The Doctrine of Justification by Faith Alone is the article upon which the church stands or falls. And the chapter begins with these words here. And in the article from Dr. R.C. Sproul's blog with respect to the question, is the Reformation over? He wrote, various observations have been made since the 16th century by today's evangelicals and theologians. One of them wrote, Luther was right in the 16th century, but the question of justification is not an issue now. A second confessed evangelical made a comment in a press conference I attended that the 16th century Reformation debate over justification by faith alone was a tempest in a teapot. Still another noted European theologian has argued in print that the doctrine by faith alone is no longer a significant issue in the church. We are faced with a host of people who are defined as Protestants, but who have evidently forgotten altogether what it is they were protesting. Contrary to some of these contemporary assessments of the importance of the doctrine of justification by faith alone, we recall a different perspective by the 16th century magisterial reformers. Luther made his famous comment that the doctrine of justification by faith alone is the article upon which the church stands or falls. John Calvin added a different metaphor, saying that justification is the hinge upon which everything turns. In the 20th century, Dr. J.I. Packer used a metaphor indicating that justification by faith alone is the atlas upon whose shoulder every other doctrine stands. Later, Packer moved away from that strong metaphor and retreated to a much weaker one, saying that justification by faith alone is the fine print of the gospel. The question we have to face in light of these discussions is, what has changed since the 16th century? Well, there is good news and there is bad news. The good news is that people have become much more civil and tolerant in theological disputes. We don't see people being burnt at the stake or tortured on the rack over doctrinal differences. We've also seen in the past years that the Roman Communion has remained solidly steadfast on other key issues of Christian orthodoxy, such as the deity of Christ, his substitutionary atonement, and the inspiration of the Bible, while many Protestant liberals have abandoned these particular doctrines wholesale. We also see that Rome has remained steadfast on critical moral issues such as abortion and ethical relativism. In the 19th century, at Vatican Council I, they call EC1, E is for ecumenical and C is for council. They call it Vatican I, Vatican Council I. In the 19th century, Rome referred to Protestants as heretics and schismatics. In the 20th century, at Vatican II, or EC2, Protestants were referred to as separated brethren. We see a marked contrast in the tone of different councils. The bad news, however, is that many doctrines that divided Orthodox Protestants from Roman Catholics centuries ago have been declared dogma since the 16th century. Virtually all of the significant Mariology decrees have been declared in the last 150 years. The doctrine of papal infallibility, though de facto, functioned long before its formal definition, was nevertheless formally defined and declared de fide, necessary to believe for salvation, in 1870 at Vatican Council I. We also see that in recent years the Roman Communion has published a new Catholic catechism which unequivocally reaffirms the doctrines of the Council of Trent, including Trent's definition of the doctrine of justification, and thus affirms that Council's anathemas against the Reformation doctrine of justification by faith alone. Along with the reaffirmation of Trent has come a clear reaffirmation of the Roman doctrine of purgatory, indulgences, and the treasuries of merit. At a discussion among leading theologians over the issue of the continued relevance of the doctrine of justification by faith alone, Michael Horton asked the question, what is it in the last decade that has made the first century gospel unimportant? This dispute over justification was not over a technical point of theology that could be consigned to the fringes of the depository of biblical truth, nor could it be seen simply as a tempest in a teapot. This tempest extended far beyond the tiny volume of a single teacup. The question, what must I do to be saved, is still a critical question for any person who is exposed to the wrath of God. Even more critical than the question is the answer, because the answer touches the very heart of the gospel. Truth, in the final analysis, the Roman Catholic Church affirmed at Trent, and continues to affirm now, that the basis by which God will declare a person just or unjust is found in one's inherent righteousness. If righteousness does not inhere in the person, that person at worst goes to hell, and at best, if any impurities remain in his life, goes to purgatory for a time that may extend to millions of years. In bold contrast to that, the biblical and Protestant view of justification is that the sole grounds of our justification is righteousness of Christ, which righteousness is imputed to the believer, so that the moment a person has authentic faith in Christ, all that is necessary for salvation becomes theirs by virtue of the imputation of Christ's righteousness. The fundamental issue is this: is the basis by which I am justified a righteousness? The question is this: is the basis by which I am justified a righteousness that is of my own? Am I justified by a righteousness that is of my own? Or is a righteousness that is righteousness, Luther said, an alien righteousness? Or is that righteousness that is, has Luther said, an alien righteousness, a righteousness that is extra nos, not this righteousness that is an alien righteousness or extra nos would be apart from us, the righteousness of another, namely the righteousness of Christ. From the 16th century to the to the present, Rome has always taught that justification is based upon faith on Christ and on grace. The difference, however, is that Rome continues to deny that justification is based on Christ alone, received by faith alone, and given by grace alone. The difference between the two positions is the difference between salvation and its opposite. There is no greater issue facing a person who is alienated from the righteousness of God. At the moment the Roman Catholic Church condemned the biblical doctrine of justification by faith alone, she denied the gospel and ceased to be a legitimate church, regardless of all the rest of her affirmations of Christian orthodoxy. To embrace her as an authentic church while she continues to repudiate the biblical doctrine of salvation is a fatal attribution. We're living in a time where theological conflict is considered politically incorrect, but to declare peace when there is no peace is to betray the heart and soul of the gospel. In response to the question, is the Reformation over? Theological blogger James White wrote, "You do not want to end up on the wrong side of history. This platitude has been granted prognostic status in our day. Though one could probably question its fundamental truthfulness, it reflects, however, the prevailing attitude of Western culture, a pragmatism that enshrines in the judgment of history, whatever that means in this context, the final arbitrator of morality." Goodness and worth. Often this phrase is being urged upon the church to move on from opposing homosexuality or the redefinition of marriage. But this adage also captures the general attitude of a large portion of the population on both sides of the Tiber River to the Reformation and the continuing battle over the issues that give it birth. Isn't it time just to move on? Can't we lay aside our differences for a greater good? Aren't we a small enough minority now in the midst of the tsunami of secularism and the rising tide of Islam? Shouldn't we be looking for unity, not for more reasons to remain separate? We dare not dismiss the weight that these rhetorical questions carry with many within our congregation and even among the clergy. At the same time, we must recognize the responsibility that is ours as heirs of the great struggle that was the Reformation. Can we betray those who came before us? What would such a betrayal involve? Are we really willing to assert that the great and monumentous beliefs they fought for are no longer as important as we once thought? The election of a new bishop in Rome in 2013 shed new light on the state of these questions in the minds of many who profess to be evangelicals and biblical in their faith and orientation. Pope Francis, as you know, in the media, has actually been quoted to having said that there is no hell. I mean, if you take that out of the gospel, you don't have a gospel at all. One well-known evangelical leader communicated with his followers electronically that we should be praying that God would guide the process of the selection of a new pope. In most venues, the objection that there is nothing remotely biblical about Supreme Pontiff who is to be venerated as the Vicar of Christ on earth or the Holy Father found little expression outside of those whose strongest feelings on the matter are born of prejudice rather than conviction. And once the selection was made, many of the evangelical camp expressed pleasure at the selection, if for no other reason than Pope Francis they call him Francis I, Pope Francis, has seemed significantly more well-human, or at least less imperial, than Benedict XVI. But very little of the public response has prompted by a passionate commitment to say, the solos of the Reformation, or a knowledgeable, informed rejection of Rome's soteriology over against a deep-seated love of the doctrine of justification by grace alone through faith alone. Should the Reformation continue to hold a place of importance in the Church that faces such immense opposition as that coming from radical, gospel-hating secularism? Wouldn't a united front, free from partisan bickering, help the cause of Christ? The answer has to be, of course, the Reformation remains important, and in fact its work must continue in our day and into the future as well. The reason is not hard to see. Even if it seems hidden to many in our day, wonderfully nebulous catchphrases like the cause of Christ often hid the truth. The cause of Christ is the glorification of the Holy Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, through the redemption of a particular people through the crosswork of Jesus Christ, which is a rather Puritan way of saying the cause of Christ is the gospel. Each of the emphasis of the Reformation summed up in the solos, the 5 solos, is focused upon protecting the integrity and the identity of the gospel itself. Without the inspiration, authority, harmony, and sufficiency of Scripture, we do not know the gospel, sola scriptura. Without the freedom of grace and the fullness of the provision of the work of Christ, we have no saving message, sola fide, and so on. Remember, Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6 says, without faith it's impossible to please God, sola fide. Our justification is based upon sola fide, by faith alone, and sola scriptura, the Scriptures alone, and sola Christos, in Christ alone, and his propitiation or atonement on the cross, and by sola gratia, by grace alone. The Reformation fought a battle that each and every generation is called to fight, simply because each and every generation is made up of each and every generation is made up of the fallen sons and daughters of Adam, and hence there will always be those who seek to detract from the singular glory of God in the gospel through the addition of man's authority, man's merit, and man's sovereignty. Is this not the meaning of semper reformanda, the Latin words always reforming? The Church always reforming, always seeking to hear more clearly, walk more clearly to her precious Lord. With the ebb and flow of human history, the forces arrayed against the Church and her Lord, and the particular front upon which the battle rages hottest, will change. Rome's theology has evolved and her arguments have been modified, but the issues remain very much what they were when Luther and Eck battled at Leipzig, only modified and complicated. God's kingship, man's depravity, and enslavement to sin, and the insatiable desire of sinners to control the grace of God will always be present. And today, the sufficiency, clarity, and authority of Scripture are at the forefront just as they were then. The need for the Reformation will end when the church no longer faces foes inside and out who seek to distort her purpose, her mission, her message, and her authority. Till then, semper reformanda, or always reforming. I was surprisingly stunned upon reading from Mark Knoll and Carolyn Nystrom's book, Is the Reformation Over? Question mark. And after reading that, it became apparent to me that I'm going to have to publish my first book with not the question, but the emphatic statement with an exclamation point at the end of it, and the title of my first published book, The Reformation Cannot Be Over. And now chapter 3 reads, what has caused some to think that the Reformation is over? Before I go into chapter 3, I wanted to regress back to Knoll and Nystrom's book. They had the title, Is the Reformation Over? Question mark. And in 1873, at the New York meeting of the Evangelical Alliance, a delegation from Canada expressed an opinion that almost all others at the International Protestant Gathering would have approved. The most formidable enemy of the living Christianity among us is not deism or atheism or any form of infidelity, but the nominally Christian Church of Rome. According to Knoll and Nystrom, they further elucidate that in the introduction of their book, Is the Reformation Over? By asking if the Reformation is over, we mean to use the classic ideals of the Protestant Reformation to measure contemporary Catholic Christianity. Sola Scriptura, the Bible has supreme authority. Sola Fide, salvation by grace alone, through faith alone. And the priesthood of all believers has a corrective to corruption of the priesthood, were Protestant rallying cries resulting in pointing to what has rightly been called the Copernicus revolution in theology. God, instead of humanity, the Reformers asserted, needed to be recognized as the center of the spiritual universe. Remembering that Knoll and Nystrom's purpose was to make an assessment of the contemporary Catholic Church based on these same Reformation criteria. The question is, the Reformation Over, the title of their book, appears straightforward, but it is not by any means a question to be answered simply. Part of the reason the question cannot be answered simply has, of course, to do with evangelicals like ourselves who are doing the asking. Thus, and not incidentally, we hope that our examination of contemporary Roman Catholicism will enable evangelical Protestants to understand themselves more clearly, and therefore will help them grasp, internalize, and proclaim the essential principles of the Christian gospel that were at issue in the Reformation itself. The reason some think that the Reformation is over is because, number one, it was a historic fight against medieval corruption of the Middle Ages in the Roman Catholic Church 500 years ago. Number two, others think that the theological differences in doctrine have been responded to appropriately in the 16th century Council of Trent, the 19th century Vatican I, or the 1962-65 Vatican II. and no longer view the Protestant as a schismatic heretic, but rather a separated brethren. Number 3, Pope Francis is quite a PR man, using the secular news media outlets to advance his subtle ecumenical agenda, speaking softer words to the Protestants in his planning to celebrate the 500th anniversary of the former excommunicated Roman Catholic priest Martin Luther's writing of the 95 Theses or indictments against the Roman Catholic Church and posting them on the door of the University of Wittenberg, October 31st, 1517. In a surprising reversal, Pope Francis will be naming a Vatican Square after Martin Luther in October of 2017 to celebrate the 500th anniversary of him actually posting these indictments against his mother church. So, effectively, Pope Francis uses the satellite television and internet signal, along with social media outlets such as Facebook and Twitter, etc., will so impact the masses of uninformed people, because most of, with regards to these theological issues, the masses are uninformed. Satan likes to keep people ignorant and in the dark about these truths. Like I said, Pope Francis uses social media and television, radio signals to impress the masses of uninformed people to really think that the Reformation is over, subtly and very proactively proving the divisions are past, and to think otherwise would not only be schismatic or divisive, but also politically incorrect. In the last minute of this broadcast here, because of the time strains that are upon me, I'm going to have to pick up with this in the next session of Richard Allinger Presents Lessons in Church History, and close out with Pope Francis's public affirmation with soft words advancing his ecumenical agenda is quite another thing when speaking in private among his Jesuits. And I'll get back with you with regard to the Jesuits and its one of its founders, St. Ignatius of Loyola, back after Martin Luther had posted his 95 Theses. Well, this is Richard Allinger saying goodbye, friends, and I hope that you'll join me again in my next sessions. Richard Allinger Presents Lessons in Church History. Goodbye, friends.
Don't worry, the 74 people were picked before me in the NFL draft. To fight childhood obesity, United Way and the NFL are helping kids play more. To donate or volunteer, go to unitedway.org/play60.
Now I get it.
Me dijeron que no debía soñar. Me llamaron pedazo de basura y juraron que eso es todo lo que llegaría a ser. Dijeron que una botella no podría ver el océano. Ríndete. Regresa al basurero. Pero no les hice caso. Le abrí paso. Y ahora estoy aquí. Soy lo que siempre quise ser.
Is the most prominent thing, and I am at peace with myself. I didn't deal this deck, I'm just playing the game. That's all. That's it. Meals on Wheels has given me a mode of freedom that I wouldn't have otherwise. Been making sure they get the nutrition that I need, and it's a balanced meal. My name is Maurice McGriff. America, let's do lunch.
Drop off a hot meal and say hello. Volunteer by donating your lunch break at americaletsdolunch.org.